I was 16 when the folly of youth and the lure of April Fools conspired to etch a permanent shadow over my life. Our small town was steeped in superstition, a place where legends and ghost stories weren't just tales to scare children, but were woven into the very fabric of our existence. I stopped believing in ghosts right around the time I stopped believing in Santa Claus. Now, I have never seen Santa with my own eyes to say that the big man in red sitting on a sled drawn by reindeers is real, but ghosts, I can vouch with my right eyeball that they walk among us, forever lost. You can only pray that you do not ever cross path with them or disturb them. Among the many tales of the departed that we had heard as kids, one less talked about was the tale of old Martha, the town hermit, rumored to have dabbled in witchcraft. She lived in a decrepit house at the edge of the woods, a place we'd been taught to avoid since we were kids. But adolescence brings a certain type of arrogance, a disbelief in the old ways, a hunger for adventure that often blinds better judgment. It was my idea. I thought it would be hilarious to prank her with a monster attack, to tap into the very superstitions we mocked yet were subconsciously ruled by. My friends, caught up in the spirit of April Fools, eagerly agreed. We spent a week planning, crafting the most realistic costume from bits of fur and masks we could find, all to scare an old woman who, in our minds, was nothing more than a relic of a bygone era. The night was perfect. A sliver of moon barely lighting the sky, casting long shadows that played into our prank. We approached old Martha's house, hearts racing with excitement and a touch of fear. Fear not of the supernatural, but of being caught. I was the monster, cloaked in shadows, moving with exaggerated beast-like motions. My friends banged on our windows and doors, calling out warnings of a creature come to claim her soul. The door cracked open, and there she stood, old Martha, her eyes wide not with fear, but with the sorrow so deep it momentarily halted our jest. Before we could retreat, before we could reveal the prank, she spoke, her voice a whisper that cut through the night.
By next April's Fool, you shall know the true face of horror.
And as soon as she said those words, her knees gave in and she collapsed before us, falling flat on her face, dead. Her heart couldn't bear the cruel joke we played. Panic set in. We pulled her inside her own dark and dingy house that stank of rotten meat and gathered dust. My friends helped me place her body on a small bed, but as we were doing that, we heard an animal's growl from outside. We weren't brave enough to stop to investigate and fled back to the safety of our families, convincing ourselves it was a terrible accident, that our prank was not the cause. But as the days turned to weeks, and the weeks turned to months, the weight of old Martha's curse began to manifest. Strange occurrences began to plague each of us. Shadows lingered a moment too long. Laughter echoed with no source. Dreams turned to nightmares from which we woke up screaming. And somehow, all of us always saw a dark wolf in our nightmares. We tried to convince ourselves it was just guilt, but the truth of our situation was far more sinister. It was only when the manifestations became too personal, too terrifying to deny, that we acknowledged the reality of the curse we had scoffed at. As April Fool's Day approached once again, the dread within us grew. We knew with a certainty that chilled our bones that the culmination of old Martha's curse was upon us. We attempted to apologize, to make amends by visiting her grave, offering flowers, and pleading for forgiveness. But the grave was cold, the silence around it, an ominous portent of our failed attempts at redemption. The final night before the curse was to take full effect, we gathered together, seeking solace in numbers, hoping there was strength enough among us to withstand whatever horror awaited. But nothing could have prepared us for the truth of horror old Martha promised, a truth that would unravel the very fabric of our reality. As the clock struck midnight, ushering in April Fool's Day, the air around us thickened, charged with an unseen energy that made our skin crawl. We sat in silence, our bravado replaced by a palpable fear that clung to each breath. The house, once filled with the laughter and carelessness of youth, now seemed a prison, each creak and whisper of a harbinger of the doom old Martha had foretold. Then it began. The first sign was subtle, a flicker of movement in the corner of the eye, easily dismissed as a trick of the light or a product of frayed nerves. But then, the shadows grew bolder, coalescing into forms that were almost human, whispering our names with voices that dripped with malice. We clung to each other, our previous disputes and bravado forgotten, united in our terror. It was in this chaos that the truth of the curse revealed itself, not through the specters that tormented us, but through the very fear they inspired. With each manifestation, with every cry and plea for mercy, we were forced to confront the reality of what we had done. "We're sorry, Martha!" I had cried, almost shrieked at the top of my voice. My friends did the same, and suddenly, everything stopped. The horror wasn't in the shadows or the voices. It was in us, in the guilt and the memories of that night. Old Martha's curse didn't summon monsters. It made us face the monsters within ourselves. As dawn broke, the manifestation ceased, but the relief we expected didn't come. Instead, there was an emptiness, a realization that we could never undo the harm that we had caused. We had sought to scare an old woman with tales of monsters, but in the end, we were the monsters, our actions born of cruelty and thoughtlessness. In the weeks that followed, our group fractured, each of us grappling with the curse in our own way. But the curse was not so easily appeased. The true twist, the real horror, came when we realized that old Martha's curse had never been about haunting us with supernatural terrors. It was about living with the knowledge of our actions, of knowing that we could never escape the shadows of that night. I left town, hoping to outrun the memories, but they clung to me, a constant reminder of the curse we invoked. It had almost been 7 years now from that day. The April Fools, which falls in a week, will be the 7th since Martha died. Last night, I got a call from my father that my friend Brad's house caught fire and he perished. When I tried to get in touch with another friend of mine, Jerry, his sister picked up the call, only to deliver the sad news that he died a few days ago when he accidentally slipped and came under a subway. I tried to reach Jordan as well, only to find out that he hung himself a month ago and passed away. Brad, Jerry, and Jordan were my 3 friends who accompanied me that night to old Martha's house. I couldn't put my finger at it, but I knew for a fact that death was coming from me. My fears only became a certainty when I was researching about witchcraft and learned that 1 witch year is equal to 7 human years. My fascination with lost films has always been a peculiar part of me, a badge I wore with odd pride. I watched Citizen Kane, The Godfather 1 and 2, and The Lawrence of Arabia over a weekend as a 9-year-old kid who was sick and feeble and suddenly found an enchanting world in the movies. Over the years, I got my hands on all the old classics, especially the ones made in the golden years of Hollywood. But there was one movie I had only heard whispers of here and there on internet forums, which created a minor controversy upon release and was immediately pulled out. That's how I stumbled upon the dark web listing for The Shadow Beyond, a film rumored to have been lost since its only screening in 1952, a screening that ended in tragedy when the audience was found in a state of inexplicable terror, some even driven to madness. My friend Alex, equally intrigued by the macabre and unexplained, agreed to watch it with me, oblivious to the horrors we were about to invite into our lives. We set up the projector in my dimly lit living room, the reels emitting a faint, musty scent that seemed to whisper of forgotten times. As the film crackled to life, we were greeted with scenes that seemed mundane at first. Shadowy figures lurking in alleyways, a procession of faceless people marching through a fog-shrouded city. But there was something unnervingly hypnotic about the way these figures moved, as if they were more than mere projections of light and shadow. "It's just a bunch of old film tricks." Alex tried to laugh it off, but his voice wavered, betraying his unease. We've seen modern horror movies. This would pale in comparison. As the film progressed, the imagery grew more disturbing. Scenes of indescribable rites and grotesque figures twisted in agony flickered before us, their silent screams echoing in our minds. It was then that we noticed the air around us had grown colder, the shadows in the room deepening, creeping closer as if drawn by the flickering images.
Charlie, do you feel that?
Alex's voice was a mere whisper, his eyes fixed on the shifting shadows that seemed to dance at the edge of our vision. I could only nod, my throat tight with fear. The film had cast a spell over us, a connection to something ancient and malevolent. We should have stopped it then, should have heeded the warning signs, but we didn't. Our curiosity, that insatiable human flaw, kept us rooted in place, our eyes glued to the screen. That night, after Alex left, the real terror began. I tried to convince myself it was just the after effects of the film, my imagination running wild. But the shadows in my home seemed to move of their own accord, stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that defied the laws of physics. Whispers filled the air, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, yet filled me with an inexplicable dread. I barely slept, the few moments of rest plagued by nightmares that were too vivid, too real. Scenes from the film replayed over and over, but each time something from the shadows would turn its gaze directly at me, its eyes filled with a malevolence that chilled me to my core. The next day I called Alex, desperate for some semblance of normalcy, hoping he would tell me it was all in my head, but he didn't answer. When I finally reached him later that afternoon, his voice was strained, laced with fear.
Charles, something's wrong. I saw one of them today, in the daylight. It was watching me from across the street, just standing there in the shadows. I blinked, and it was gone, but I know what I saw.
His words sent a shiver down my spine. I had hoped what I experienced was a product of my own imagination, but Alex's encounter confirmed our shared nightmare was far from over. The days that followed were a descent into a nightmare we couldn't wake from. Alex and I tried to rationalize our experiences, to find a logical explanation for the shadows that seemed to stalk us, for the whispers that filled our ears with dread. But deep down, we knew we had tapped into something ancient, something evil, through the shadow beyond. One evening, as I sat alone trying to drown out the whispers with blaring music, I noticed a figure standing just outside my window. It was cloaked in shadows, its form barely distinguishable, but its presence was unmistakable. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as I slowly raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. There was no sound, but the message was clear. I was not alone.
Alex, it's getting worse,
I confessed over the phone, my voice shaking.
He was outside my house tonight. I don't know what to do. We have to find out more about the film,
Alex replied, a determined edge to his voice.
There has to be a reason why this is happening. Maybe there's a way to stop it.
His words sparked a flicker of hope, and we spent the next day scouring the internet and old film archives for any mention of the shadow beyond. Our search led us to an obscure film historian who had written a paper on lost films, including ours. He agreed to speak with us, his curiosity piqued by our desperation. The historian, a gaunt man with eyes that had seen too much, listened to our story with a grave expression. When we finished, he sighed, his gaze distant.
You're not the first to experience this,
he began, his voice solemn.
The film was created by a cult in the early 50s, designed as a ritual to breach the veil between our worlds and the Shadow Realm. I believe they could control the shadows, use them for their own ends, but they were wrong. The shadows cannot be controlled. only unleashed.
His words were a cold splash of reality. We had unleashed something we had no hope of controlling. What can we do? Alex asked, desperation creeping into his voice. The historian shook his head slowly.
The original reel was supposed to contain a ritual for sealing the breach, but it was lost before it could be used. Without it, I'm afraid there may be no way to close the door you've opened.
That night, the shadows grew bolder, more aggressive. Whispers turned to screams, the darkness alive with malevolent intent. Alex and I huddled together in my living room, the only light from the flickering candles casting long, terrifying shadows across the walls.
We have to go back,
I said, the realization dawning on me.
We have to watch the film again. There has to be something we missed, some clue on how to end this.
Alex nodded, his face pale but resolute. We prepared ourselves, not knowing if we would survive the encounter, but knowing we had no other choice. The projector hummed to life, the opening scenes of The Shadow Beyond flickering onto the wall. We watched, our eyes scouring each frame for something, anything that might save us. But as the film reached its climax, something strange happened. The shadowy creature, which was featured in it, lifted a lamp and attacked the hero the first time that we watched it. But this time, it stopped in its tracks, turned, and it seemed like he looked at us. Suddenly, the room chilled to an unearthly cold, and in a second, the creature leapt towards us, jumping out of the screen and into the real world. We screamed, but before it could reach us, we suddenly felt our blood pressure drop, and we passed out. When I woke up, everything was normal, but the reel automatically burnt off. The horror stopped that day, but what me and Alex saw that night, I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy. So there I was, Bethany Beth Walters, just a girl from Cali with a penchant for making folks laugh on TikTok. My life was a mix of sunsets, smoothie bowls, and spontaneous comedy sketches. I had started my TikTok journey on a whim, never imagining it'd take off the way it did. But before I knew it, I had amassed a quirky little following that seemed to dig my vibes. It all started getting weird when I received my first fan gift, a beautiful antique-looking necklace right at my doorstep with a note that read, "For the brightest star in the night sky." It was sweet, kind of poetic, and it made me blush. I figured it was from a secret admirer, someone who had gotten a bit too invested in my online persona, but how they figured out my address, I have no idea. I showed it off in my next TikTok, thanking the anonymous sender and joking about not having a clue who it could be. But then the gifts didn't stop. A second package arrived, this time a set of vintage vinyl records, since I'd mentioned in a livestream about a month back how I was trying to get into old school music. The note was more intimate, to fill your home with melodies as beautiful as your laughter. Okay, flattering, but how did they know my address? And my recent dive into vinyl? I felt a little uneasy because when I turned the note over, it was a hand-drawn nude of myself. Artistic, yeah, but probably crossing the line. This took a darker turn with the third gift. It was a painting, but not just any painting. It depicted me, asleep in my bed, the details eerily accurate, down to the pattern on my pajamas and the color of my sheets. The note chilled me to the bone. "Sleeping Beauty, I watch over you." That's when the red flag started waving frantically in my head. This wasn't normal. This was scary. I tried brushing it off, convincing myself it was some overzealous fan, but deep down I knew it was something more sinister. I started noticing things, like my things not being where I'd left them, or the back gate swinging open when I was sure I'd closed it. Then came the messages, direct to my TikTok inbox, from an account that was always deleted shortly after. "Saw you at the cafe today. Why didn't you smile at me?" I hadn't mentioned being at any cafe online. My heart pounded like a drum solo at that realization. I confided in my best friend, Jess, about everything. She was adamant I go to the police, so I did. But without tangible evidence, they said there wasn't much they could do.
Probably just a troll,
They said, dismissing my fears. I felt helpless, trapped in my own home, jumping at shadows. Then came the night that changed everything. I was prepping for a late-night live stream, a chill session where I'd just chat with my followers, maybe play some of those vinyl records. I was setting up when I found the next note, right on my kitchen counter, a place no stranger should ever be. You look so peaceful when you're unaware. Can't wait to see you tonight. My blood ran cold. This was no longer some distant admirer. They were in my house. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was in danger. I immediately grabbed Rocky, my loyal but not so ferocious Labrador, and locked us both in the bedroom, my heart racing as I dialed 911. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, that officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of footsteps creeping through my house. They were here, inside, with me. Locked in my bedroom, clutching my phone with one hand and Rocky's collar with the other, I whispered into the phone.
They're here, inside the house.
The dispatcher's voice was a calming presence in the chaos, urging me to stay quiet and keep the door locked. Then, the unthinkable happened. My bedroom door handle started to turn, slow and steady. Rocky growled a deep, menacing sound I've never heard from him before. The door didn't budge, my earlier decision to lock it a stroke of unintended foresight, but that didn't stop them. A shadow loomed at the foot of the door, a figure standing silent in the dark hallway. I know you're in there, Bethany. A voice hissed, a voice I recognized but couldn't place, a voice that had whispered to me from the shadows of my own videos and dreams. You can't hide from me, my love. Don't worry. Open the door. I just want to make a sketch of you. Terror gripped me, freezing me in place. This wasn't just a stalker. This was someone delusional, someone who believed their own twisted fantasy. Rocky barked furiously, his body tense and ready. The dispatcher's voice broke through my panic. Officers are almost there. Stay on the line with me. Then, in a moment of pure horror, the psycho began to throw himself against the door, each thud a hammer strike to my sanity. Rocky lunged forward, barking and snarling, his instincts to protect kicking in full force. And then, he punched at the weak wood of the door before grabbing a baseball bat and hammering it again and again and again. The door broke, and the psycho put his face inside, smiling, looking at me. A shocker. I had seen him before somewhere, but had no idea where. It's about time, darling. Why don't you take your robes off and settle on the couch? I have my sketchbook right here. I was about to scream when suddenly the weight against the door stopped and he was pulled down. Silence filled the house, a silence more terrifying than the noise before. Rocky's growls turned to whimpers. Even he could feel it, the shift in the air. The next moments were a blur. The sound of sirens approached, lights flashing through my curtains, shouts from downstairs, a struggle, and then the unmistakable sound of someone being shot. When the police finally came to my room, I was a mess. Tears streaming down my face, Rocky my only source of comfort. They told me he had a knife, that he planned to take me away from a world that didn't deserve us. My stalker, my psycho follower, as it turned out, was someone I'd briefly met at a meet and greet, a face in a sea of fans, someone who had decided that I belonged to him. The aftermath was a whirlwind of statements, investigations, and an outpouring of support from my online community. But something inside me had shifted. The world felt darker, more dangerous.
I decided to stop posting TikToks, focus on healing, on rebuilding the safety of my personal space. Rocky became more than a pet. He was my hero, my protector. He sensed the danger before I had, his loyalty never wavering. It was his bark, his fierce defense, that had ultimately saved me, giving me the courage to endure those terrifying moments before help arrived. Reflecting on those harrowing nights, I realized how easily I had opened my life to the world, naive to the dangers that lurked in the shadows of fame. As for my psycho stalker, he was sentenced to a long stint behind bars, a small comfort in the grand scheme of things. The experience taught me the true value of safety, of trust, and of the strength we find in the face of darkness. It was a lesson I'd never forget. A story that would always remind me of the light that exists within us, a light no shadow could ever extinguish. The festival was supposed to be an escape, a place to lose oneself in the crowd and the cacophony of sounds that promised a reprieve from the haunting silence of my own thoughts. My name is Casey, and if you had told me that my search for solace would lead me down a path of psychological unraveling, I would have laughed. But there I was, standing at the precipice of my own mind, teetering on the edge of sanity. The day had started like any other at the festival, with the air electric with anticipation and the ground vibrating with bass. I wandered aimlessly, a solitary figure amongst a sea of faces, until a stranger caught my eye. He was an oddity, not for his appearance, which was unremarkable, but for the way he seemed to move through the crowd, untouched and unnoticed.
Looking for an experience?
He asked, his voice barely audible over the music. I nodded, curiosity piqued. He handed me a small, unassuming pill, its surface shimmering with a promise of escape.
This'll sink you to the music, but be warned, it's not for the faint of heart.
I swallowed the pill without a second thought, a decision that would come to haunt me. Anything that would let me forget the tragedy I'd faced recently, anything that could promise to pull me away and silence the 1,000 negative thoughts battering my mind at all times, I would take it. As the chemicals coursed through my veins, the world around me began to distort, the music transforming into a pulsating entity that breathed life into my darkest fears. The festival's landscape morphed before my eyes, the once vibrant scene now a nightmarish tableau of shadows and whispers. Each note of the music tugged at the strings of my soul, unraveling them with surgical precision. I was no longer a spectator. I was a part of the concert, the music weaving through me, carrying me on a tide of emotions I couldn't control. Then came the visions, vivid and terrifying. They crashed over me like waves, each one a memory of the tragedy that had sent me spiraling into despair. In one moment, every face I came across resembled me. Then, a few people started floating in the air, each of them singing a song in a language I didn't know. I was back there, in the moment that had shattered my world, surrounded by the chaos and the screams that had echoed through my dreams ever since. I tried to run, to tear myself away from the visions that clawed at my sanity, but the music was relentless, a siren call that I couldn't escape. It whispered of guilt, of secrets buried deep within my psyche, secrets I had tried so hard to forget.
Help me.
I heard myself cry out, but I did not say it. Then how was I hearing my own voice? And then, when I tried to speak, my voice was lost in the cacophony, just another note in the symphony of terror that enveloped me. Around me, the festival goers continued to dance, oblivious to the struggle that raged within me. As the night wore on, the line between reality and the drug-induced nightmare began to blur, the visions becoming indistinguishable from the world around me. I was trapped in a loop of fear and confusion, each moment stretching into eternity. It was in this state of turmoil that I found myself confronted with the most chilling vision yet. A figure, cloaked in shadows, its features obscured but its intent clear. It reached for me, a gesture that spoke of unspeakable horrors. and I knew, with a clarity that cut through the fog of my mind, that I was facing the manifestation of my own guilt. The music, now a cacophony of screams and dissonance, reached a crescendo, and I braced myself for the final plunge into madness. But it was then, at the edge of despair, that a hand found mine, pulling me back from the brink. The hand that pulled me back from the abyss felt real, grounding, amidst the swirling chaos of my own mind. Blinking against the harsh lights of the festival, I found myself staring into the concerned eyes of a friend, Maya, who had been searching for me after I'd vanished into the crowd.
Casey, are you okay? You're scaring me.
She said, her voice laced with genuine worry. Her presence was a lifeline, a beacon of reality in the tempest of my mind. I tried to articulate what I was experiencing, but how could I explain the unexplainable? The music still played, a relentless force, but Maya's intervention had somehow lessened its hold over me.
I took something.
I managed to say, my voice trembling.
It's making me see things. Horrible things.
Maya's eyes widened with understanding and concern.
We need to get you out of here now.
She decided, her tone leaving no room for argument. As we made our way through the festival grounds, the visions continued to assault me, though now intersped with moments of clarity. The crowd around me felt oppressive, each face a mask of judgment, each step a journey through my deepest fears. But Maya's presence was a constant, a reminder of the world beyond my psychedelic-induced nightmare. By the time we reached the relative safety of the camping area, the worst of the visions had begun to fade, leaving behind a residue of terror and a profound sense of vulnerability. In the silence of the early morning, with Maya by my side, I began to unravel the threads of my experience. The psychedelic journey had not been an escape, but a confrontation with the trauma I had tried so desperately to bury. The tragedy that had taken a loved one, leaving a void filled with guilt and unanswered questions.
Why did I see those things, Maya? Why did it feel so real?
I asked, the words heavy with the weight of my confusion. Maya took a moment before answering, her gaze thoughtful.
Sometimes our minds find ways to confront us with our fears, our guilt. Maybe this was your mind's way of forcing you to face what happened, to start healing.
And that's when I remembered. Maya was dead. We were in a car accident due to my recklessness, and this was the manner in which my guilt manifested to confront me. The visions, the terror, the relentless music, they were manifestations of my own psyche, a landscape shaped by my unresolved grief and guilt. And then my vision cleared, and then Maya vanished before my eyes. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. They told me that it had almost been 2 weeks that I was in a coma. As it turned out, the mystery man who had handed out the psychedelics was traced, and he was given those substances by Dr. Johnson, my therapist, along with 10 other people who were at the concert. He had performed suggestive instigation to send us to the concert and had the man give us a concoction he had brewed to illegally test his new healing therapy on his patients without them knowing. Of the 10 patients, 3 suffered cardiac arrest, while the rest of us ended up in coma in the hospital. He was arrested and the scandal broke out before I even woke up again. But the weird thing was that I felt better, much better. The confrontation with my friend Maya had given me some sort of closure, and I knew that my healing journey had begun. I felt much lighter, probably smiled for the first time in months as I saw my parents reaching to hug me. Dr. Johnson was arrested. His manner was illegal and harmful, yet it healed me of my trauma. Weird.
It was a Tuesday, a day like any other in my kindergarten classroom, filled with the sounds of laughter and the vibrant chaos of young children at play. That morning, as I prepared for another day of teaching and nurturing these young minds, I could never have imagined the horror that was about to unfold. Mr. Thompson, a parent I knew all too well for his confrontations with school staff over his son's recent expulsion, stormed into my classroom shortly after the morning bell. The look in his eyes was wild, frantic, betraying a mind pushed to its limits. In his hands, he wielded what appeared to be a mishmash of handmade weapons, objects twisted into forms meant to intimidate and harm.
Where is he? Where's the principal?
Mr. Thompson demanded, his voice a frightening growl that echoed off the classroom walls. I stood frozen, my heart racing, as the children huddled behind me, sensing the danger.
Mr. Thompson, please, let's talk about this.
I pleaded, attempting to keep my voice steady.
The children.
They need to see it. They all need to see what happens when you push someone too far.
He interrupted, slamming a spiked bat against a desk, splintering the wood. His actions were a clear display of his intent to terrorize, to punish us for perceived wrongs I couldn't begin to understand. As chaos erupted in the classroom, with children screaming and crying, Mr. Thompson began his tirade of destruction. He smashed windows, overturned tables, and threw books across the room, all while ranting about the injustice of his son's expulsion and how we were all to blame for ruining his family. I knew I had to act.
Kids, to the closet.
I whispered, guiding them to a small storage space at the back of the room. It was a tight fit, but it could hide them from view. As I ushered the last child in, Mr. Thompson noticed.
Trying to hide, like the cowards you are.
He barked, moving towards us with purpose. In that moment, I realized that I couldn't just protect the children. I needed to confront this threat head on.
Mr. Thompson, please, think about your son. This isn't what he needs.
I said, stepping forward, putting myself between him and the closet. The mention of his son seemed to hit a nerve. He paused, his expression tormented, torn between rage and a flicker of reason. But the moment passed quickly, and his anger surged anew.
You don't get to talk about what he needs. You've done enough. Where was your misplaced sense of justice when your principal made an example out of my boy in front of everybody? I paid thousands of dollars to you people in this fancy private kindergarten of a sham that you're running. Okay, you don't get to tell me shit or do anything to my son. Do you even know who I am? What I do? You messed with the wrong person, and I will make sure you get the terror which you inflicted on my son.
He screamed, raising the bat once more. It was a standoff, with Mr. Thompson's unpredictable rage against my desperate resolve to protect my students at all costs. The air was thick with tension, each of us waiting for the other to make a move. The standoff with Mr. Thompson seemed to stretch into eternity, his breaths heavy with rage, mine quickened by fear. The children, silent in their hiding spot, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, their usual energetic chatter reduced to stifled whimpers. Then, in a move I still replay in my nightmares, Mr. Thompson lunged forward, the spiked bat raised high, his intent to harm clear in his crazed eyes. Instinctively, I dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the swing that crashed into the wall behind where I had stood moments before. Pieces of plaster and wood chips rained down, a physical reminder of how close I had come to being struck.
You can't protect them forever!
Mr. Thompson bellowed, pulling the bat from the wall with a terrifying determination. It was then, amidst the adrenaline-fueled terror, that an idea sparked within me.
Mr. Thompson, look!
I exclaimed, pointing towards the classroom door, my voice laced with feigned astonishment. For a split second, his attention diverted, his head snapping towards the door, expecting what? Reinforcements? His son? In that moment of distraction, I made my move. Rushing towards him, I aimed for the hand that gripped the bat, using every ounce of strength to wrench it away. Surprised and unbalanced, he stumbled, the weapon clattering to the floor. Seizing the opportunity, I kicked the bat across the room, far out of reach. You don't understand what you're doing.
I gasped, backing away, hoping to put distance between us. But Mr. Thompson, fueled by a mix of humiliation and unchecked fury, was not deterred. He charged, intent on using his sheer physicality to overpower me. The ensuing struggle was a blur of motion and desperation. I dodged and weaved, narrowly escaping his grasps, all while screaming for help at the top of my lungs, hoping someone outside would hear. But he grabbed my hair and pulled me down, pinning me to the floor and sitting on top of me. He landed 2 powerful blows, one to my left ear and one to the chin. I was stunned for a few moments, dazed and confused about what was happening as pain shot through my face. But I couldn't back down. There were no rules to this fight. So just as he leapt up a bit, leaving himself a little room, I took all my strength into a punch, which I landed at his crotch with might. He went down in an instant, squirming in pain. And then, just as suddenly as it had all began, help arrived. The door burst open and several police officers rushed in, their commands loud and authoritative. Mr. Thompson, realizing his situation, hesitated just long enough for them to tackle him, securing him in handcuffs. As he was led away, his eyes met mine, the madness that had consumed him giving way to a dawning realization of his actions. The classroom, once a place of learning and laughter, was now a scene of devastation, a stark reminder of the terror we had all survived. The children emerged from their hiding spots, their eyes wide and tear-streaked, but safe. Safe because of a gamble I had taken, a bluff that had paid off. As I hugged each of them, comforting their shaken spirits, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that we had survived, and sorrow for the man who had lost himself to his own despair and anger. In the aftermath, as the community rallied around us, offering support and solace, I found a new resolve. The ordeal had shown me the depths of my own courage, the strength I possessed, not just as a teacher, but as a protector of my students. Mr. Thompson's attack had been meant to tear us apart, to instill fear and chaos. Instead, it had brought us closer, highlighting the resilience of the human spirit even in the face of unimaginable adversity. Our classroom would rebuild, not just the physical space, but the sense of safety and trust that had been threatened. We would move forward, forever changed, but stronger for having endured together. And as for me, Alexa, the teacher who had faced down terror to protect her students, I learned that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day whispering, "We will survive this." And we did. The day began with laughter and the promise of escapism, a respite from the heavy burden of my studies in criminal psychology. The sun was relentless in Florida, a glaring sign of relaxation over the water park that promised to wash away the academic frustrations with its cool, inviting waves. My friends and I, all of us desperate for a break, had chosen this place to unwind, to momentarily forget the burdens of our future careers.
I can't believe you're finally taking a day off, Charlie.
Jenna teased as we approached the towering slides, each one bigger than the other, their spirals like serpents basking in the sun. I know, right? I might even forget how to analyze a crime scene if I'm not careful. I replied, the irony of my words soon to unfold in ways I couldn't have imagined. What we witnessed that day at the water park, the panic, the bodies, the disaster, we weren't prepared for it. As the day wore on, laughter filled the air, mingling with the sounds of splashing water and distant music. It was a cacophony of joy, until it wasn't. The first incident seemed an accident, a tragic anomaly. A young man, his body rigid, sank beneath the water's surface without a struggle, as if embraced by the depths. It was surreal, watching him drown in a pool crowded with people, all of us initially unaware of the unfolding tragedy.
It's gotta be a prank.
Jenna muttered. I don't want to horrify her, but the moment they were pulling the person out, I knew he was gone. The arrival of the paramedics, their faces etched with urgency, shattered any illusion of hope that Jenna might have had. She screamed, like many others around, and hugged me as tears left her eyes.
We need to clear the pool!
One of the lifeguards shouted, his voice slicing through the confusion. I watched, a silent observer trained to notice the details others might overlook. It was then I saw him, a figure moving with a deliberate calmness amidst the chaos. He was an older man, his gaze fixed on the unfolding scene, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips. Did you see that? I nudged Jenna, pointing subtly at the man. Something's off about him. She glanced in his direction, her brow furrowing.
We're out of school, Charlie. There's no criminals hunting in water parks. Let's just calm down.
Before I could answer, another scream pierced the air, drawing our attention to a second victim in a wave pool across. Like the first, this person showed no signs of struggle, simply succumbing to the water as if their body had betrayed them. This isn't right, I murmured, my mind racing. Accidents were not unheard of, but the lack of struggle, the complete surrender to the water, it hinted at something far more sinister. Determined to understand, I approached the man I had spotted earlier. He was now sitting alone, watching the chaos from a distance. Excuse me, sir, I began, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. Did you see what happened? He turned to me, his eyes cold, the smile gone.
Tragic, isn't it? People should be more careful.
His response was too casual, too detached. Do you come here often? I pressed, hoping to glean more about him.
Every now and then,
he replied, his tone academic, almost clinical. The conversation was cut short by the arrival of more emergency personnel, their focus on securing the area and attending to the victims. I watched as the man stood, blending into the crowd, disappearing before I could question him further.
Charlie, let's stick together,
Jenna said, her voice laced with anxiety.
This is getting too weird.
She was right. The festive atmosphere had soured, the laughter replaced by whispers of fear and confusion. Yet, amidst my fear, my curiosity, my need to understand the why and the how grew stronger. It was then I decided to follow my instincts, to delve deeper into the mystery that had turned a day of leisure into a nightmare. Little did I know, the truth I sought would lead to one of the darkest days in our recent times. As the day descended into chaos, with the park's once vibrant atmosphere now overshadowed by fear, my resolve to uncover the truth behind the sinister events only strengthened. The memory of the man's detached demeanor lingered in my mind, a puzzle demanding to be solved. My friends, sensing my determination, rallied around me, despite their own apprehensions.
We should really inform the authorities, Charlie. This could be dangerous.
Jenna insisted, her concern palpable. I will, but first I need to understand what we're dealing with, I replied, my decision firm. The knowledge I'd acquired in my criminal psychology course became a beacon, guiding my next steps. We divided our efforts, agreeing to discreetly observe and gather any information that could shed light on the situation. It wasn't long before I noticed a pattern as more people started drowning in other areas of the water park. Before each incident, the same man was always in the vicinity, his presence a constant among the variables. Armed with this realization, I approached the park security, relaying my observations and suspicions. The security team, already on high alert, promised to discreetly monitor the man while ensuring the safety of the remaining guests. As the security initiated their subtle surveillance, I couldn't shake off a feeling of being watched. Turning, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the man, his gaze now fixed on me, an ominous glint in his eyes. The hunter had become the hunted. The confrontation was inevitable, so I decided to confront him head on. Why are you doing this? I demanded, cornering him away from the crowd. Who are they? His response was chilling, a confession delivered with chilling calmness.
I'm an architect of fear, Charlie. I create scenarios to observe human reactions to fear and paralysis. It's fascinating, don't you think?
My blood ran cold at his words, but it was his next revelation that truly shook me to my core.
Do you remember me, Charlie? I doubt it, but I remember you. Your father was my esteemed colleague, whose life's work I continued after his untimely death.
The connection snapped into place, a twisted lineage of study and madness. My father, a renowned neurologist, had died in a lab accident years ago, his research into paralytic agents lost with him, or so I had thought. You're his protege, I realized, the pieces of the puzzle aligning into a horrifying picture.
Precisely. And today I proved that I completed his work. Plant-based paralytics, shared paranoia. You know, your father wouldn't have tried it on himself if your stupid mother wouldn't have alerted the administration. And now, when I should have been savoring my masterpiece with a glass of iced tea, you alerted security. I would have handed myself over once this was over, Charlie. But I needed you to be here. Your father was my idol, and you, his son, will be my masterpiece.
He proclaimed, revealing a syringe hidden within his coat. The ensuing struggle was a blur, a desperate fight for survival. It was only through sheer luck and the timely intervention of park security that I managed to escape his grasp, the syringe shattering harmlessly on the ground. The man was apprehended, his reign of terror brought to an end, but the scars of that day remained etched into my memory. The water park, once a place of joy, had become a scene of nightmares, with 13 people dead. The final twist, a revelation that haunts me to this day, was the understanding that the line between genius and madness is perilously thin, and that sometimes the monsters we fear lurk not in the shadows, but among us. I remember the first day of April like a scene straight out of a movie, where the unsuspecting protagonist, me, Jamal, walks into a plot he never saw coming. I was a first-year student at Ridgemore Community College, barely adjusted to the independence and the chaotic beauty of campus life. Our small college had this unique tradition for April Fool's Day, a scavenger hunt that promised fun and harmless mischief. It sounded like the perfect distraction from my mounting coursework and the homesickness that clung to me like a shadow. The hunt was simple. Find the cursed artifacts hidden around town, with clues provided by the organizers. The whole thing was meant to be a joke, a way to bond over shared laughter and the thrill of the hunt. I teamed up with a couple of friends eager to dive into what we thought would be a memorable adventure. The first few artifacts were easy to find, hidden in plain sight with clues that were more puns than puzzles. We found a cursed book in the library that was supposed to make us speak in tongues, and a haunted mirror in the local cafe that promised to show our true selves. We laughed at each discovery, documenting our journeys with selfies and shared jokes, blissfully unaware of the shift that was about to happen. As the day progressed, the clues led us to more secluded parts of town, and the artifacts we found began to stir an unease in the pit of my stomach. A vial of witch's blood, hidden in the graveyard, made the air around us feel colder, denser. A phantom's lantern from the old bridge seemed to flicker with ghostly light, casting long shadows that whispered of forgotten tales and warnings. The laughter among my friends faded, replaced by a tense curiosity. We joked less and watched more, our steps growing cautious as we followed the clues to the next artifact. It was in the abandoned theater downtown, a place rumored to be truly haunted, where we found the cursed mask of a forgotten actor, said to trap the soul of anyone who dared to wear it. I don't know why I put it on. Maybe it was the adrenaline, or the desire not to seem afraid in front of my friends. The moment the mask touched my face, a chilling silence enveloped me. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and erratic, as the darkness behind the mask seemed to swallow me whole. When I finally managed to tear it off, gasping for air, I realized that the world around me had changed. My friends were gone, the theater was eerily silent, and the playful adventure of the scavenger hunt had turned into a nightmare. I stumbled out of the theater alone and disoriented, the mask clutched in my trembling hands. The town, once familiar and welcoming, now seemed like a labyrinth designed to trap me in its web of shadows. Each artifact we had collected seemed to pulsate with a malevolent energy, as if awakening to a purpose we had been too naive to see. It was only when I witnessed the shadows moving on their own, coalescing into shapes that whispered my name, that I realized the danger we were in. The artifacts weren't just props for a college prank, they were conduits for something darker, something that had been lying in wait for unsuspecting fools like us. As I raced to find my friends, to warn them of the danger we had unleashed, I couldn't shake the feeling the hunt was far from over. The real curse was not the artifacts themselves, but the realization that we were not the hunters, but prey, in a game that had turned all too real. The night that followed was a blur of terror and confusion, as we each encountered our own nightmares, brought to life by the cursed artifacts we had collected. The town turned against us, its streets and shadows alive with threats that seemed to mock our desperation. It was only when the sun rose, casting light on the havoc of the night, that we found each other again, huddled together in the daylight, trying to make sense of the horror we had survived. But the relief of daylight was short-lived, as we realized the nightmare wasn't over, it had only just begun. In the days that followed, our once tight-knit group frayed at the edges, paranoia and fear becoming our constant companions. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just the aftermath of a bad trip, a collective hallucination fueled by the artifacts and the eerie atmosphere of April Fool's Day. But deep down, we knew it was something far more sinister. The shadows didn't just whisper my name that night, they whispered truths, secrets that no one else could have known, feeding on our darkest fears. I began to research, digging into the history of the artifacts and the town itself, desperate for answers. It was during one of my late-night sessions in the library that I stumbled upon a name, Professor Caldwell, a name that was linked to a series of experiments on the power of suggestion and collective hysteria. Caldwell was a psychology professor at our college, a man respected and feared in equal measure, known for his unconventional methods and his obsession with the limits of the human psyche. The pieces started to fall into place, each clue leading me closer to the horrifying truth. The scavenger hunt, the artifacts, the nightmares, they were all part of Caldwell's experiment, a twisted study on fear and the human condition. We were not participants in a harmless tradition. We were subjects in an experiment that had spiraled out of control. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Caldwell, demanding answers. The confrontation was surreal, the esteemed professor sitting calmly in his office, surrounded by books and artifacts that seemed to pulsate with an eerie energy. He didn't deny it. Instead, he explained his theory with a fervor that bordered on madness. He spoke of breaking the human spirit, of unveiling the true nature of fear, and of us, his subjects, as if we were nothing more than data points in his grand experiment. I recorded everything, my phone hidden in my pocket, capturing his confession, his madness. With the evidence secured, I went to the authorities, but convincing them was harder than I thought. Caldwell was respected, his reputation seemingly untouchable, and our story, without the recording, sounded like the ramblings of a traumatized student. It took weeks during which the shadows continued to haunt us, and the artifacts seemed to mock our desperation. But eventually, the recording was enough to prompt an investigation. Then, everything unfolded, a history of ethical violations and psychological abuse on subjects who didn't know they were parts of an experiment. Little girls, college students, nuns in a church. Caldwell was arrested and his notes confiscated by the government. But the final twist came on the day of Caldwell's sentencing 2 years later. As they let him away, he turned to me with a look in his eyes that chilled me to the bone. "You think you've won, but fear is timeless. You've merely opened the door wider." Caldwell was committed to a mental institution later, his mind lost to the very experiments he had devoted his life to. But his words, they stayed with me. In the aftermath, we tried to return to normal, but the scars of that April Fool's Day remained. We were changed, each of us carrying the weight of the nightmares. The tradition of the scavenger hunt was abolished. As for me, I learned to live with the shadows. The whispers in the night, a constant reminder of the fine line between reality and madness. Caldwell's experiments had ended, but the fear, the true curse of that April Fool's Day, lingered, a testament to the darkness that awaits us all, just beyond the light. That was the night I left drugs altogether. My name is Matt, and at 21, I thought I understood the world. How wrong was I? My friend had secured some Indian psychedelics that sages took to get closer to God. I had my own shit to deal with, so anything that could get me to God was going in. The trip began as any other, with a vibrant tapestry of colors and the dissolution of the physical boundaries that confined my consciousness. But this time, there was a shift, a dark undertow that pulled me towards something inexplicable. I found myself standing before a mirror, the glass no longer a mere reflector of reality, but a gateway to a realm I wish I had never discovered. As I peered into the mirror, the first wave of horror hit me. A woman's face, twisted in agony, emerged from the depths. Her eyes, filled with an eternal despair, locked into mine, and I heard her voice reverberating through my very soul.
"Help me,"
she pleaded, her hands banging against the glass, creating ripples as if the mirror was the surface of a disturbed pond. I stumbled back, my heart racing, yet I could not tear my gaze away. The room around me darkened, and the mirror began to show more than just my own reflection. A child, no older than 6, appeared beside the woman, his face contorted into a silent scream as he fell, over and over, never reaching the ground but perpetually caught in a loop of terror. I could almost hear the sound of his fall, a whisper of air that chilled my spine. "Who are you?" I managed to utter, my voice trembling.
"We are the trapped."
The woman replied, her voice a melodic sorrow that tugged at the edges of my consciousness.
"Bound to relive our horrors, unable to find peace."
I wanted to run, to escape the mirror's ghastly visions, but something held me in place, a morbid fascination, a need to understand. The mirror's surface rippled again, and a new horror took shape. A man, his body emaciated, chains wrapped around his limbs, dragging himself toward me. His eyes were hollows of despair, and with each movement, the chains tore into his flesh, leaving trails of ethereal blood. "Free us!" he rasped, his voice a cacophony of pain and pleading. I recoiled, my mind reeling from the onslaught of their tortured existences. The air suddenly grew colder, a frigid embrace that felt like the touch of death itself. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice lost in the growing tempest of their despair.
"You see us. You can free us."
But how could I? "It's a crazy trip, yo." I started laughing, and suddenly the mirror's surface calmed to show my own reflection once more. I woke up the next day in a dilapidated structure where the boys from around the town came to get high. Before me was the same mirror from the trip. The memories of the night suddenly clawed at the edges of my consciousness. It all felt like a bad dream, a figment of my imagination spurred by the psychedelic trip. Yet, the echoes of their pleas lingered, a constant reminder of the horrors I had witnessed. I spent the day in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that what I had experienced was more than just a hallucination. It was a call, a duty that I had been too afraid to accept. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows that danced like specters across my room, I knew I could not ignore their cries any longer. I had to return to the mirror, to face the darkness, and to find a way to free the souls trapped within. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth that awaited me, a revelation that would forever change my understanding of the world and my place within it. That evening, I got high for the last time. With a resolve that felt both alien and integral to my being, I approached the mirror again. The room dimmed as if the light itself was hesitant to witness what was to come. My reflection stared back at me, a specter of the boy who had unknowingly crossed into the realm of the damned. I reached out, my fingers grazing the cold grass, half expecting to be pulled into the abyss. Instead, the surface rippled, and the woman appeared once more, her expression one of solemn gratitude.
You came back.
She whispered. I want to help you, but I don't know how.
The items.
She said, her voice clearer now, as if my acknowledgement had given her strength.
A lighter, a pack of salt, and a candle. They're the keys.
Her instructions were cryptic, yet they resonated with a truth I couldn't deny. I looked down and saw a bag in my hand, with a lighter, a pack of salt, and a candle. Crazily, I did not even remember buying it. The woman guided me, her voice a beacon in the encroaching darkness. I placed the candle before the mirror, encircled it with salt, but just as I was about to light it up, I stopped. I don't know what it was, but I felt a pull that just said that something wasn't right. I was still tripping. The world was spinning around my body. My body temperature shot up all of a sudden, and I was seeing colors that I didn't even know existed. And then I saw her eyes, ripe with anticipation.
Light it. Set me free. Set us free.
But I couldn't. Something was pulling me away.
Set us free.
She uttered again. My hands trembled.
Set us free.
This time she yelled, impatient as ever, and I moved back instinctively. That is when she roared, her lips parted to reveal an array of pincer-like sharp teeth, with her gum protruding out. The child emerged as well behind her, his eyes black as space and skin pale. And then the man arrived, his skin decaying and peeling off, hanging off his bones. She wailed, the child cried, the man wailed, and at that moment, I was as scared as I ever could be. Strange shapes were forming around me, mirrors appearing and disappearing, geometrical patterns appearing out of thin air. The floor underneath my feet started trembling as their cries echoed. I felt the whole house shaking, and then, just as the woman banging on the mirror wall, I collapsed, blackness surrounding my eyes. When I woke up, the room was bright, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a fog at dawn. I stared at my reflection in that dirty mirror before me, still feeling goosebumps, searching for any sign of the horrors I had witnessed. But there was only me, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. I blamed it on the psychedelics. Whatever the trip was, it was just too bloody real. In the days that followed, I convinced myself it had been nothing more than a hallucination, a bad trip induced by the psychedelic. Yet, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of something profound and terrifyingly real. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old dust-covered journal hidden beneath the floorboards of my room that I understood the true magnitude of what had transpired. The journal belonged to the previous occupant, a young woman who had dabbled in the occult. She spoke of the mirror, a family heirloom, and its power to trap the souls of the dead, binding them to relive their torments. There was a picture of her husband and child as well. What I saw that night wasn't a hallucination. The grandeur of that evening had been palpable, the air within the ancient walls of the theater vibrating with anticipation for the classical music concert. As a violinist, I, Sebastian, had always found solace in the intricate melodies and harmonious symphonies that filled such spaces. Music was not just my profession, it was my sanctuary, my connection to the world beyond the notes on the page. The concert had commenced with the swelling of strings that day, the air resonating with the collective breaths of an enraptured audience. Our ensemble, a blend of seasoned musicians and prodigious talents, played with a fervor that belied the years of rigorous training and dedication to our craft. It was during the second movement, a delicate adagio, that the harmony was shattered. The sharp, discordant crack of gunfire echoed through the hall, a malevolent intrusion that turned the music into a cacophony of screams and chaos. From my position on stage, I watched in horror as confusion and panic swept through the concertgoers. The surreal nightmare unfolded in slow motion, my brain struggling to process the reality of the situation.
Sebastian, we need to get off stage now,
whispered Anna, the first violinist, her eyes wide with fear. But I couldn't move, paralyzed not by fear, but by an overwhelming sense of responsibility. These were our patrons, our fans, the lifeblood of the arts, and they were under attack in our sanctuary. The gunfire ceased momentarily, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps and labored breathing. The shooter was moving through the theater, his presence an ominous specter haunting the once hallowed halls. In that moment of eerie silence, a plan formed in my mind. I knew the theater like the back of my hand, every nook and cranny, every passage used by performers or yesteryears. If anyone could navigate through this chaos, it was me. Anna, tell everyone to hide. I'm gonna try and stop him, I said, my voice steadier than I felt.
Sebastian, are you insane? You can't—
I know this place, Anna. It's our best chance. Call the police and stay hidden until I come back. Without waiting for her response, I slipped off stage, moving with purpose through the backstage corridors. My heart pounded in my chest, a frenetic tempo that matched my quickening pace as I maneuvered through the labyrinthian passageways. The sound of the gunman's movements guided me, a sinister symphony that I followed, driven by a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. As I neared, the reality of what I was about to do set in. I was no hero, just a musician. Yet here I was, chasing down a madman in a deadly game of cat and mouse. The backstage area was dimly lit, the shadows my only concealment as I spotted the gunman reloading his weapon. His back was to me, a momentary vulnerability that I seized, launching myself at him with a makeshift weapon in hand, a piece of broken stage equipment I'd grabbed along the way. The collision set us tumbling to the ground, the gun skittering away into the darkness. What followed was a blur of motion, a desperate struggle for survival. Every self-defense class I'd reluctantly attended, every bit of strength I possessed, was funneled into that moment.
I'm not gonna let you destroy what we've built here,
I gasped, my voice a mix of determination and fear as we grappled on the cold, hard floor. The gunman fought back with a surprising ferocity, his own determination evident in his movements. But the advantage was mine, fueled by adrenaline and the intimate knowledge of the terrain. As our struggle continued, I couldn't help but wonder how we had arrived at this point. What series of events had led this individual to disrupt a celebration of art with violence and terror? The answer, I feared, would not be a simple one. But in that moment, all that mattered was stopping him, ensuring the safety of those who had come to share in the beauty of music, only to find themselves caught in a nightmare. The struggle seemed to stretch into eternity, each second a lifetime of effort and fear. The gunman was strong, his desperation lending him a wild, unpredictable strength that was difficult to counter, but I had something more powerful on my side. A determination born of love for my art and the sacred space it inhabited. This theater was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a sanctuary for those who believed in the transformative power of music. I could not, would not, let this man desecrate it further. As we fought, I realized that the piece of broken stage equipment I had wielded as a weapon was now pressing against his throat. It was a metal rod, part of a stand that had snapped during the initial chaos. With every ounce of strength left in me, I pressed it against him, pinning him down with a leverage I scarcely knew I possessed.
Stop this madness!
I hissed, my breath ragged from the exertion.
Why are you doing this?
For a moment, his eyes met mine, and in them I saw not the ferocity of a predator, but the desperation of a man cornered by his own demons. He was skinny, not much stronger than myself. He wasn't a seasoned attacker or a mercenary, that I was sure of, else he'd have pinned me down in an instant. But then, what pushed him to do this? He gasped for air, struggling behind my hold, but the fight was going out of him, his strength waning. It was then that the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the backstage area, the cavalry arriving in the form of theater security and police officers, their voices loud and authoritative. The gunman went limp beneath me, his surrender silent but unmistakable. Officers quickly took over, handcuffing the man and dragging him to his feet. As they led him away, one of the officers stayed behind, a look of incredulity on his face.
You're lucky to be alive,
he said, his voice a mixture of admiration and reprimand.
What made you think you could take him on, son?
I shrugged, the adrenaline fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I know this place. It's part of me, and I couldn't stand by and watch it be destroyed. As the police secured the scene and paramedics attended to the wounded, I found myself surrounded by my fellow musicians, their faces a tapestry of relief and trauma. Anna approached, her eyes shining with unshed tears.
You're insane, Sebastian,
she said, but her voice was thick with gratitude.
But thank you.
In the days that followed, the events of that night became a blur, a nightmare recounted by news reports and whispered conversations. The gunman, it was revealed, had no connection to a theater or the orchestra. His motives were attributed to misplaced rage against the rich, a narrative all too common in the stories that dominate our headlines. The concert hall, once a place of pure artistic pursuit, had become a battleground, a stark reminder of the fragility of the spaces we hold dear. But in the aftermath, as the community rallied to reclaim and restore the sanctity of our theater, I realized that music's power transcends even the darkest of moments. We held a concert not long after, a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit and the unifying power of music. As I took the stage, my violin in hand, I felt a profound connection to every person in that room. The notes we played that night were more than just melodies. They were a declaration of our refusal to be silenced by fear.
I remember the day Dean slid into my DMs, smooth as butter, his words sweet as honey. He had that true Texas charm, talking about his sprawling ranch outside of Lubbock and his love for the wide open skies. Said he was a big fan of my travel vlogs and thought a collaboration would be just the thing my followers would eat up. He invited me for a 10-day all-inclusive free trip to his luxury ranch, where we'd shoot and collaborate on TikTok. I admit the idea of filming horses galloping at sunset and the rustic beauty of Texas had me packing my bags without a second thought. The drive up to Dean's ranch was like stepping into another world. Miles and miles of open land, the kind of solitude you read about in those old Western novels. Dean was waiting for me at the gate, all smiles and warmth, a real cowboy in flesh and bone. "Welcome to paradise," he said, taking my bag. The first red flag came that evening. Dean insisted on a welcome ceremony, said it was tradition. We stood outside as the sun dipped below the horizon, and he started chanting in what sounded like some twisted version of Latin, his eyes closed and arms raised to the sky. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end, but I chalked it up to cultural differences, trying to keep an open mind. But things got weirder fast. Dean's demeanor changed once the camera was off. The warm, charming guy I met online was gone, replaced by someone cold and controlling. He'd snap over little things, like me not standing where he wanted during filming or questioning his rituals. "You don't understand the forces we're dealing with here,"
he'd said, his temper flaring like a wildflower. That night, he led me to a barn far from the main house for what he called the ceremony of binding. Inside the barn was lit by dozens of candles, casting eerie shadows on the walls. In the center stood an altar, draped in red cloth, with symbols I'd never seen painted all around them. Dean claimed it would bond our spirits for the shoot, ensuring the success of our collaboration. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, I found myself frozen, caught in the headlights of his fervent belief. He began the ceremony with more chanting, then pulled out a small, ornate knife, gesturing for my hand. A drop of blood to seal our bond. That was the moment I knew I had to get out. But when I pulled away, his reaction was volcanic.
You don't respect the traditions!
He yelled, grabbing my arm with a grip that bruised. I managed to wrench free, running back to the main house and locking myself in my room. That night, I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the ranch, a symphony of nocturnal creatures and the distant, unsettling echo of Dean's chants. I realized then that I wasn't just a guest on his ranch, I was a prisoner. The following days blurred into a nightmarish cycle of bizarre ceremonies and Dean's growing unpredictability. He didn't let me leave. He talked about purifying the land, about me being chosen for something greater. I started to see the truth of my situation. I was in the clutches of a madman, far from home and completely alone. As the days melded into each other, each one a little echo of the last, my sense of despair deepened. Dean's ceremonies became increasingly deranged, each one supposedly a step closer to some grand event he kept alluding to but never fully explained. In one, he sacrificed a newborn horse, rubbing its blood on our faces to cleanse our vibrations. In another, he invited his local friends, and it led to a ceremony where I was tied to the center, and they took turns to feed me raw chicken one by one.
You'll be the heart of it all, Paris,
he'd say, with a fervor that made my blood run cold.
The final ceremony will change everything.
I knew I couldn't wait for whatever twisted finality Dean had planned. My escape had to come from my own cunning. The idea struck me late one night. I still had my phone, though Dean checked it daily to ensure I wasn't calling for help, but he never thought to check my TikTok, assuming it was just frivolous nonsense. I began crafting my posts carefully, inserting hidden messages in my videos, a plea for help in the description, coded in what seemed like innocent travel tips. Coordinates of the ranch subtly highlighted in the background of a shot. It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had.
Today, we're exploring the deeper parts of the ranch,
I said in one video, forcing enthusiasm into my voice as I gestured to the dense woods behind me.
It's wild and untamed, full of mysteries.
Dean's mood swings grew more violent as the days passed. His anger erupted over the smallest things, a misplaced item, a moment of hesitation from me. But it was his belief in the ceremonies that truly terrified me. He spoke of them as if they were alive, whispering secrets only he could understand. The final ceremony was nearing. Dean promised, with a gleam in his eyes that chilled me to the bone.
You're almost ready. Soon you'll see.
I posted my last video the day before the ceremony was to take place, a tour of the ranch that ended with a shot of the barn where Dean said it would all happen.
Can't wait to show y'all what's next,
I said, my voice trembling. The description read,
Tomorrow's the big day. Can't reveal much, but let's just say it's going to be a blast. Wish me luck.
In the background, if you look closely enough, were the coordinates of the ranch, written on a piece of paper pinned to the barn door. That night, Dean was restless, pacing the house, muttering to himself. I lay in bed, pretending to sleep, my heart racing. I heard him leave the house before dawn, heading toward the barn to prepare. I slipped out of my room, my phone in my hand, and made my way to the edge of the property. I hid in the brush, dialing 911, praying for a signal.
Please, you have to help me. He's planning something terrible.
I whispered into the phone when the call finally went through. The sound of sirens in the distance was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Dean emerged from the barn, his face twisted in rage as he saw the police cars tearing up the driveway.
No! You don't understand! It's not finished!
They found me in the brush, shaking and crying, but alive. As they led Dean away, his eyes met mine, full of betrayal and madness.
You were the chosen one!
He yelled.
You've ruined everything!
In the aftermath, my TikTok became a testament to my ordeal. Each hidden message a breadcrumb that had led to my rescue. The world was horrified and fascinated by my story, but for me, it was a painful reminder of the terror I had lived through. Sitting in the safety of my own home, far from the wide open skies of Texas, I realized how narrowly I had escaped. Dean's ranch, his ceremonies, his madness, it all seemed like a bad dream, but the scars it left were all too real, a reminder of the darkness that lurks behind the most charming of facades. I had survived, but at a cost. My trust in others, my sense of safety, had been shattered. Yet, as I looked into the comments on my videos, the messages of support and relief at my safety, I knew I wasn't alone. My story had touched people, reminded them of the strength we all have within us, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth everything I'd endured. I remember the day as if it were yesterday, though it's been 20 years. My name is Ed, and I'm a psychologist. I've spent a considerable part of my career studying the impact of unresolved trauma on the human psyche. Perhaps my interest in this field was sparked by a personal tragedy, the loss of my best friend, Jamie, at a pool party I had thrown in my backyard 2 decades ago. It was ruled as an accidental drowning, but something about that day never sat right with me. The way the light danced mockingly on the water's surface as we all stood in disbelief, the hushed whispers that followed, and the faces of those present, 7 boys and girls, now men and women, who I suspected knew more about Jamie's death than they let on. On Jamie's 20th death anniversary, I received a text from his sister. She was going through his old stuff and found an image of us from 2 decades ago. My heart told me that there was something more to his death, and then when I received that picture, I got reminded of my best friend. He always shared his food, taught me how to skate, and got me into Dungeons and Dragons. He even taught me how to tie my shoelaces. The least I could do now after 20 years was to use my experience and get the truth, perhaps approach it like an experiment. So I staged a pool party, mirroring the one from our youth, and invited those 7 individuals under the guise of a nostalgic reunion. Each had moved on, or so it seemed, their faces etching a map of the years that had passed, yet within their eyes, I searched for traces of guilt. As the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows around the pool that had been the scene of my greatest loss, I proposed a game of truth or dare. It was a fitting choice given our shared history. Let's start with something light, I suggested. Dare for Adam. Dive into the pool and swim 10 laps without stopping. See if he still doesn't sink with his belly. Adam, once the jock of our group, hesitated, only a moment before complying. His dive was less graceful than it used to be, but when he emerged from the water, shaking his head like a dog after just 3 laps, there was laughter. A tension broke, but it was only the beginning. I followed it up with some fun tasks, got out some gossip, and chose some dares which we only did as kids. Along with these dares, I was also passing them more gin and tonics, and it didn't take the group much time to get loose. In between, I suddenly brought up that Jamie used to love throwing rocks at the crows which sat on the cables beside the pool, and the tone sombered down. This was an important play, a part of suggestive poking, as I call it. And the very next question I put to Lisa, the same question which I had asked her 2 decades ago, but she refused to answer. Truth for Lisa, did you ever hide something important from someone at this very party 20 years ago?
Yes.
She admitted after a pause.
I saw someone push Jamie, but I was scared. I didn't know what to do.
A collective gasp filled the air, and the atmosphere shifted palpably. I didn't want the awkwardness to linger, so I pulled out a few more fun questions to divert the attention on what Lisa had said. Dare for Michael. Stand on the diving board and recount the day Jamie died. The whole truth. Michael, whose loyalty to Jamie had always been in question, climbed onto the board reluctantly. I can't, he stammered, stepping down. The admission of his cowardice was damning in its own right. As the game moved on, the air grew thick with confessions and accusations started flying among the group. Yet, the confession I sought remained elusive, dangling just out of reach as the evening wore on. That is when people started leaving. As I cleaned up the remnants of the party, my mind raced with possibilities. Had I come any closer to the truth? Or had I merely reopened old wounds for nothing? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. The game of truth or dare had set something irrevocable in motion. As a psychologist, I understood the power of guilt and the weight of secrets held for too long. It was the next day when the breakthrough came. Lisa reached out to me.
Ed, we need to talk.
She said, her voice trembling over the phone. The urgency in her tone was unmistakable, and we agreed to meet in a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. Sitting across from me, Lisa looked like a shadow of a girl I once knew.
After the party, I couldn't stop thinking about what I said, about what I saw. It wasn't just someone pushing Jamie. It was Thomas.
The name hit me like a physical blow. Thomas, one of our closest friends, always the life of the party, always the one we thought would do great things. How had I not seen it? Why didn't you say anything before? I asked, my voice barely a whisper.
I was scared. Thomas threatened me afterwards. I was just a kid, Ed. I didn't know what to do. And then as time went on, it just got harder to say something.
Her confession, while seemingly straightforward, painted a seed of doubt in my mind. As a psychologist, I'm trained to notice discrepancies in behavior and speech, and something about Lisa's narrative didn't align. Her body language betrayed her, the way she avoided eye contact and the slight tremble in her voice, not of fear, but perhaps guilt. I casually mentioned a fabricated piece of evidence, a tactic often used in therapy to encourage honesty. You know, Lisa, they are reopening his investigation. His sister found the strangest thing among Jamie's belongings recently, a locket inscribed with the initials LS. I know you had been cheating on your boyfriend at the time with him. Curious, isn't it? It was as if the floodgates had opened. Lisa's composure crumbled, the weight of 2 decades of guilt proving too much to bear.
I didn't mean for it to happen.
She sobbed, her confession pouring out. It had been an argument while the others were inside to watch an episode of their favorite show. It escalated, making her push him in the pool. He was super drunk, so by the time she returned a few minutes later, he had drowned. The locket, a piece of evidence I had invented, has been nothing more than a psychological ploy, yet it had been the key to unlocking the truth. Lisa's immediate recognition of the item, which didn't actually exist, confirmed her involvement beyond a shadow of a doubt. It was a risky move, but one that paid off. No one remembers their belongings from 2 decades ago. With Lisa's confession, the case reopened a dramatic turn. The truth about that day, long obscured by time and silence, was finally brought to light. The community was shaken by the revelation, a poignant reminder of how easily the truth can be concealed and how heavy the burden of guilt can become. As I sat in the courtroom watching the proceedings unfold, I couldn't help but reflect. It was a bittersweet victory, one that brought closure to Jamie's family, but at a significant cost. In the end, it wasn't just about solving a mystery or uncovering a secret. It was about seeking justice for a friend lost too soon. It started as an adventure, a weekend escape to a cabin nestled within the heart of the forest, surrounded by the allure of untouched nature. My friend Susan had suggested we try something new, something to break the monotony of our daily routines. That something new was a psychedelic known for unlocking the deeper chambers of the mind. We were seeking enlightenment, or perhaps just a story to tell. How naively we danced into the jaws of an unfathomable nightmare. The first hit began innocuously enough. Laughter filled the cabin as the walls seemed to breathe and colors danced in vibrant arrays. It was magical, transcendent, until the night crept in, bringing with it a palpable sense of dread.
Susan, do you feel that?
I remember asking, my voice trembling as the joyful atmosphere soured.
It's just the trip, Sylvia. Let it flow.
She responded, her voice a soothing balm to my rising panic. But then, I saw some shadows twisting, converging into shapes that defied the natural laws of light, and among them emerged a figure with piercing blue eyes, eyes that seemed to penetrate the very essence of my being. It was then that the laughter died, replaced by a silence so heavy it threatened to smother us. The forest demon, as I heard a sound call to me, was a figure born of the darkest ink of night. It whispered promises of despair and taunted me with visions of my deepest fears. Falling into a black void with no end, stuck in a coffin lowered into the ground with no breath left, then surrounded by spiders and rats which feasted on my body while my hands were chained, and then witnessing the forest demon charging at me. Each loop reset with slight variations, a nightmarish Groundhog Day with the stakes of our sanity.
Worst trip ever,
Susan said, and I remembered that thankfully I was just tripping bad. There was no shadow or forest demon, but I lapsed again into more scenarios. In one iteration, the demon chased me and my friend through the forest, its footsteps echoing our frantic heartbeats. Trees turned into grotesque figures, their branches reaching out to snatch at us, tearing at our clothes and skin. We'd stumbled into the cabin, believing ourselves safe, only for the door to burst open as Susan screamed for me to help her.
Sylvia, please, you have to save me from it.
Susan's pleas would pierce the chaos, her figure being dragged away into the darkness by the blue-eyed horror. Each time I tried to save her, the scene would reset, plunging me back into the start of the nightmare. With each loop, the cabin grew more dilapidated, the forest more sinister, and the demon's grip on our reality tighter. Desperation set in as I fought to break the cycle, to save us both from an eternal damnation. The variations of the loop brought new horrors. In one, I saw Susan running alongside me, scared just like me. She urged me to hold her hand, but as soon as I did that, she stopped me with an unnatural force and came to a halt. That is when a sly smile crept up on her face, and her eyes suddenly turned blue. I tried to pull away, but she just kept smiling, and then, without warning, she groaned in a hoarse, unnatural voice. Within moments, she transformed into the forest monster, a dark being that chilled me to my bones. I suddenly felt my blood draining and I started losing consciousness. That is when suddenly, out of nowhere, a big stone flew in the air and smacked the demon in the face. It left my hand and turned to the source.
Leave my friend alone,
I heard momentarily before losing consciousness. In another scenario, I saw Susan talking to the stairs, laughing about the abstract shapes that she was seeing and how hungry she was feeling. Suddenly, everything felt normal again. I returned to my senses. I could finally breathe clearly, felt my blood pressure return to normal, felt alive.
This was the worst trip, ever.
I mumbled. She laughed.
Where did you even get these from? This guy? Which guy? This guy who grows shrooms in the graveyard behind my house.
She laughed again.
What the hell, Suze?
I managed to speak.
What did you see? A lot of shit. What shit? There were all these images, scenery about like my worst fears ever. And in every scene, you were there saying, "Help me."
I stood shocked. How did she know?
"Help me."
She reiterated.
"You have to help me."
She repeated, her voice heavier.
"Save me."
Her voice started growing heavier and manly with each moment.
"Help me!"
She screamed in a manly voice, and suddenly her blue eyes were back and everything around me crumbled. All of it was still a trip. And then the scenarios of horrors began again. Through each iteration, one constant remained: Susan's plea for help against the backdrop of those haunting blue eyes. It became my anchor, the focal point of my resolve. I had to save her. I had to break the cycle. As the loops continued, a chilling realization dawned on me. Each scenario, no matter how twisted or surreal, carried a kernel of truth, a reflection of our innermost selves that we have tried to bury. The psychedelic hadn't just opened the door to our minds, it had shattered it, leaving us exposed to the elements of our psyche we weren't prepared to face. Then, without warning, the cycle halted. The abrupt end to the cycle was as disorienting as the loops themselves. I found myself lying in a sterile hospital room, the beeping of machines filling the space where the forest's eerie silence had once resigned. The psychedelic journey that had promised enlightenment had instead delivered me to the brink of madness, and from there, into a coma that had lasted a month. As I regained consciousness, fragments of the nightmare clung to me, the demon's blue eyes, the most vivid of all. The relief of waking was palpable, a stark contrast to the terror that had enveloped me in that endless loop. Yet, as the fog of sleep and drugs lifted, a hollow feeling settled in my chest.
"Susan?"
I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, the first word I had spoke after coming back to the living. The nurse who had been adjusting the IV paused and looked at me with a mixture of relief and sorrow.
"You're awake. We weren't sure when or if you'd come out of it,"
she said softly, offering me a gentle smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. There was something there, a shadow of something unsaid.
"Where's Susan?"
I pressed, the urgency in my voice fueling a growing sense of dread. The nurse hesitated, her expression shifting to one of discomfort. It was a moment before she spoke, her voice laden with the weight of words she wished she didn't have to say.
"Susan, she didn't make it."
She finally admitted, her eyes dropping to avoid mine.
"I'm so sorry. She passed away the day you both were found."
The news hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The loops, the demon, Susan's pleas for help. It all crashed down on me with a newfound brutal reality. Guilt, sharp and merciless, clawed its way through me. Had I been trapped in a loop of my own making, unable to save her even once? But it was the nurse's next words that chilled me to the bone, words that would haunt me forever.
It was the strangest thing. When they found her, her eyes, they were completely blue.
The first time I noticed something was off was when a beautifully illustrated, albeit slightly worn copy of Hansel and Gretel appeared in my classroom at Little Sprouts Kindergarten. There was no note, no indication of who it might have come from.
Probably a donation,
I thought, shrugging it off. I'm Sally. By the way, born and bred in New York, teaching these kids with all the patience and love I've got. The donations didn't stop at the book. Odd trinkets followed, crumbs of what looked like real bread, tiny figures that resembled children, and, most disturbingly, a small vial of what I prayed was red food coloring. It was when a note finally did appear, things took a sinister turn. For the little ones to find their way, it read, in a handwriting that was jagged and hurried. I brought it up with the principal, Mrs. Levinson,
but she waved it off as someone's idea of a joke. But I knew better. New York's taught me to sense when something's amiss, and boy was I right. It escalated quickly from there. One morning we found our classroom door replaced with one that looked like it was straight out of a fairy tale, aged wood with iron detailing. "Welcome to the adventure," another note read. This time the staff was alarmed, but before we could delve deeper, the day's horrors unfolded. The storyteller, as he called himself, made his grand entrance, masked and robed, turning our school into a stage for his twisted narratives. Worse yet, he carried what looked like an automatic gun. He began with Hansel and Gretel, forcing us to breadcrumb trails around the school, leading to candy traps, sticky floors that glued the kids' shoes to the ground. His laughter echoed through the halls, a sound I won't easily forget. Next, he twisted the Pied Piper, playing eerie music all over the school's PA system. The children, entranced or perhaps just confused, followed the sound to the gym, where they were met with a maze of pipes and ropes. "Lead them, Sally," he demanded through the intercom, his voice a mix of glee and madness. "Or the rats will." I did as told, heart pounding, as I navigated the children through the maze, all while trying to shield them from the reality of the terror we were facing. His temper flared at any deviation from his script, objects being thrown from shadows, narrowly missing us as he bellowed corrections. The next of his performance was the most horrifying. "Sleeping Beauty," he declared. A student, little Emily, lay asleep in the center of the classroom, surrounded by thorns, real rose bushes he'd somehow brought inside, complete with sharp thorns. "Wake her, but beware the thorns, dear Sally." His voice taunted from somewhere I couldn't see. I wanted the kids to not panic, so convinced them that the masked man was just playing a game and we have to play along. It took every ounce of my being not to break down in front of the children. Using a path I cleared of thorns, I reached Emily, waking her with a gentle shake. It was a game to him, but a nightmare to us, one that felt too real, too dangerous. That is when Mrs. Levinson broke and rushed to her office to ring an alarm, but the masked man's bullets were faster. Mrs. Levinson's body fell with a light thud and skidded off on the floor as the gunshots terrified us all. Kids started screaming, teachers started shivering and crying, and then he yelled at the intercom again to quiet us all. "If anyone tries to make a call, a bomb would go off. If anyone tries to run out of the school, a bomb would go off. If anyone tries anything to disrupt my game, even if it's a kid or a teacher, they will die. I have my eyes everywhere." I had a feeling that the final act was yet to come, a revelation that would shake me to my core. I had to signal for help somehow. That is when I got an idea. As we were told to take the kids out to a different classroom, I got my hands on turpentine oil, which was used in art classes. As we were leaving, I quickly ran and soaked a curtain in it before picking a magnifying glass and focusing the sunbeam on it. It didn't take much time for it to light up, and I rushed out of the room, pretending not to know anything. Every minute passed with the staff and students of Little Sprouts Kindergarten on edge, waiting for another shoe to drop. And drop it did, in the most unexpected and horrifying way. Suddenly, there was an artificial fog everywhere inside a different classroom that he invited us in, and a life-sized figures of wolves lurking between the trees. Little Red Riding Hood. A note pinned to the front door announced, the jagged handwriting now hauntingly familiar. This time, the storyteller emerged from the shadows, dressed as the grandmother, his mask grotesquely resembling an older woman. "Oh, Sally,"
What big responsibilities you have."
He crooned, stepping into the light, the staff frozen in fear behind me. The task he set before us was macabre, a scavenger hunt for items to save Grandma from the wolf, hidden somewhere in the fog. With each item found, he would release a child from the cage he'd built out of tables in the middle of this nightmare. His temper was explosive. Any misstep from us or the children resulted in a tirade of shouts and bullet shoots. As the day wore on, his demands grew more bizarre and dangerous. He wanted us to reenact scenes from the story, with him narrating every move. It was during one of these performances, as I had to pretend to be Little Red Riding Hood, that I noticed something, a pattern in his madness. Each tale he chose was about children overcoming fears, outsmarting their foes. It was a slim chance, but it was all I had. I began weaving hints into our performances, signaling the children to be brave, to remember what we'd learned in class about real and make-believe. All the while, the storyteller watched, oblivious to the silent rebellion growing under his nose. The climax of his sick game came with the final note, left on the face of a little child. "The grand finale awaits, dear Sally. Come to the library, and let's end this story together." I knew it was a trap, but I also knew it was an opportunity to end this once and for all. I entered the library, the air thick with anticipation. He was there, waiting, the grandmother mask now lying on a table beside him, his real face shrouded in shadow. "You've played your part well, Sally, but like all good tales, this one must come to an end." But I wasn't alone. The fire which I had set alerted the passerbys, and firefighters were called along with police. They immediately realized that something wasn't right and called backup. The storyteller was so engrossed in his tales that he never even heard the faint sirens. And soon, the police burst in. The storyteller, caught by surprise, was quickly apprehended. As they led him away, his identity revealed. I couldn't believe my eyes. Mr. Thompson, the quiet librarian who'd been with us for years, his mind lost to grief after losing his own child, had become the storyteller. He'd sought to recreate his twisted version of children's stories, where the stakes were life and death, believing he was teaching them resilience through fear. The aftermath was a blur of police statements, counseling sessions for the children and staff, and a community trying to heal. Little Sprout's kindergarten would never be the same, but we had survived, stronger and more united than ever. It all started as an innocent deep dive into the dark web. My friend Jamie and I, armed with nothing but our curiosity and a newly acquired dubious guide to the hidden corners of the internet, we stumbled upon a forum that seemed harmless at first. A place where people shared secrets, unsolved mysteries, and the occasional conspiracy theory. It was exhilarating, feeling like we had uncovered a hidden world. Until we received a private message from a user known only as Watcher. Watcher claimed they had been observing us, noting our keen interest in the dark web secrets. The message was unsettling, but what froze our blood was the attachment. Files containing our personal information, photos and conversations we had in private, and details no stranger should know. The message was clear. We were being blackmailed. The first task seemed almost laughable. Walk into a crowded supermarket and scream a conspiracy theory at the top of your lungs. Embarrassing, sure, but harmless. We thought complying might end this nightmare, so we did it, recording the act as proof.
This market is built on a graveyard. You're walking on ancient warlands,
Jamie yelled.
Ancient jewels are buried under this land. We have to dig it out. A stolen treasure was lost in the war and hidden right here in the graveyard.
Watcher's response was a simple, chilling, "Well done. More to come." As days passed, the tasks grew increasingly bizarre. One demanded we paint our faces with grotesque makeup, attend a local high school football game, and cheer for the team in complete silence, never breaking eye contact with the camera we were instructed to set up across the field. The video, once sent to the watcher, was met with approval and the promise of escalation. We wanted to quit, but we were reminded of our sensitive information once again. "We have to come out," I said, holding Jamie's hands, but he pulled back. His parents would kill him if they knew his reality. The next one was something out of a horror story. We were to break into the local animal shelter at night, dressed as clowns, and release the dogs while live streaming the entire act. The task was not only weird, but illegal. The sensitive information hung over us like a sword, compelling us to comply. We executed the task under the cover of darkness. Each task was a step further into the abyss, a descent into madness we couldn't escape. The blackmail was relentless, Watcher's grip on us tightening with each completed task. We were pawns in a sadistic game, our lives spiraling out of control. Jamie and I spent countless nights debating our next move, searching for a way out, but Watcher was always one step ahead. The tasks, each more demanding and dangerous than the last, were breaking us down, tearing at the fabric of our friendship. The final task arrived like a death sentence. Jump off your building at midnight, stream it. Do this, and you're free. Forever. The absurdity and danger of the request paralyzed us. This was no longer about humiliation or breaking the law. It was a matter of life and death. I remember sitting with Jamie in silence, the weight of our situation crushing. It was then, in the depths of despair, that a spark of defiance ignited within me. I wouldn't let the Watcher win. I proposed a plan to call Watcher's bluff, to confront this monster head-on and reclaim our lives. Jamie was hesitant, the fear palpable in his eyes, but eventually, he nodded in agreement. We were in this together, for better or worse. The night was pitch black as we approached the terrace, the cold air biting at our skin. We set up the live stream as demanded, but instead of complying, I turned the camera to face us and spoke directly to the Watcher. "We are done with this. You want to tell the world our reality? So be it. We'd rather face our parents' disappointment than jump to our deaths, you psycho." The silence that followed was deafening, a moment suspended in time where everything hung in the balance. Then, a message. "Impressive. You're free to go." Relief washed over us, a feeling so intense it was almost euphoric. In the days that followed, peace enveloped our lives. The absence of Watcher's menacing presence felt like emerging from a long oppressive shadow, but the peace was deceptive. In the wake of our rebellion, a haunting silence took hold. Jamie became distant, his once vibrant demeanor shadowed by something I couldn't decipher. Our conversations grew sporadic, filled with unspoken fears and the heavy burden of our recent past. I attributed his change to the ordeal we had endured, confident that time would heal the scars left by our encounter with Watcher. Then, one evening, I received a call that would shatter the fragile semblance of normalcy we had clung to. It was Jamie's mother, her voice cracked with emotion, informing me that Jamie had jumped off the building. His final act was broadcasted to an unknown audience. The world around me came to a screeching halt, reality fracturing into a million pieces. I raced down the stairs, refusing to believe what I had heard, only to be met by the flashing lights of police cars and a crowd of onlookers. The truth was undeniable, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. Jamie had jumped, his decision a mystery wrapped in the enigma of our shared nightmare. In the days that followed, I was consumed by guilt and confusion. Why had Jamie jumped? Had Watcher returned to torment him? Or was the psychological toll of our experience too much for him to bear? I scoured our communications for any clues, any signs that I might have missed, but found nothing. The absence of answers was a torment all on its own. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Our act of defiance on the bridge had been a facade, a moment of bravery that masked a deeper, more insidious despair. Jamie had been pushed beyond his limits. I failed to see the signs, too caught up in my own relief to notice the cracks forming in my friend's resolve. As I grappled with the aftermath of Jamie's death, a chilling discovery was made. The police informed me that the live stream of Jamie's jump had been traced back to a server associated with Watcher. But when they raided the place, they found a Chinese family living there who were illegal immigrants. Jamie's jump, whether a desperate bid for freedom or a final act of defiance, had been part of Watcher's game all along. A week went by in despair, but soon after the funeral, I got a message from an unknown number.
Congrats, you passed the experiment.
Who is this?
You know who.
Why did you do it?
I didn't. He did it himself. This was the 7th experiment. 7 couples preferred dying over letting their secrets come out. Except for you. You stood up. That's a specimen who should live. Courageous.
Who the hell are you? Why are you doing this?
I just watch. Watch how my subjects play the game once I give them the push.
You're a psycho.
I know. You want to know what his last words were?
What? What? Tell me now!
He will be waiting for you to join him. In the end, the truth of what drove Jamie to the edge remained elusive, buried within the digital depths of the dark web. Our journey, which had begun as a thrilling escapade into the unknown, had ended in tragedy, a stark reminder of the dangers lurking within the shadowy corners of the internet. I share our story as a cautionary tale, a testament to the devastating impact of digital manipulation and the hidden dangers of the dark web. Stay safe.
My name is Betty, and for years my world had been the endless corridors and bustling terminals of the airport. I thought I knew every secret, every hidden corner where lost items and forgotten stories gathered dust as I ran my mop through the gigantic international airport, but nothing could have prepared me for the mystery that began to unfold one quiet night shift. It started with a note, tucked beneath a bench in Terminal B. Written in a hurried scrawl, it read, "They never landed because they never left." It was nonsensical, yet something about it unnerved me. I pocketed the note, telling myself that it was just a prank, but curiosity had already taken root in my mind. Over the following weeks, more notes appeared, each more perplexing than the last. Flight 440 is a lie, one declared, hidden inside a restroom stall. Another, found beneath a tray table in the food court, warned, "Beware the ghost gates." These messages, scattered like breadcrumbs throughout the airport, hinted at something beyond the edges of my understanding. Driven by a need to make sense of these cryptic warnings and a lot of boredom at my job, I began to piece together a timeline, cross-referencing the notes with old flight schedules and airport records that I could find online. Flight 440, as it turned out, was a flight that had mysteriously vanished from schedules years ago. A flight the airport administration and operator claimed had been canceled permanently due to operational issues. Then, one night, as I was cleaning an old storage closet for supplies, I stumbled upon a sealed box labeled Flight 440. My heart raced as I cut through the tape, revealing a trove of personal effects. Watches, wallets, even children's toys. It was as if the passengers had simply vanished, leaving everything behind. I decided to confront Jerry, the night shift manager, someone who had been at the airport as long as I had, if not longer.
Jerry, have you ever heard about Flight 440?
I asked him one night, trying to sound casual. Jerry's face went pale, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a tight-lipped tension.
Daddy,
Some stones are better left unturned, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Trust me, you don't want to dig into the past. But his warning only fueled my determination. I knew then that there was truth to be found, buried deep beneath layers of secrecy and fear. The notes were not mere pranks, they were desperate messages. My investigation led me to a retired pilot, Captain Harris, who had supposedly flown the last known flight of 440. He met me at a rundown bar near the airport, a shell of a man he once was, haunted by memories he couldn't escape.
Captain Harris, I need to know about Flight 440.
I said, quick to cut through the pleasantries.
What happened to it?
He looked at me, his eyes clouded with grief and something darker, a burden too heavy for one soul to bear. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice a hoarse whisper. I never flew Flight 440. I was told to be quiet when I started poking and soon declared unfit to fly. I did my own digging, but someone attempted to kill my daughter and I had to stop. All that I know is that it was hidden, locked away in a hangar that you won't find on any map. The passengers, they became part of something terrible. His words sent shivers down my spine, a confirmation of my worst fears. But I had so many questions. I realized I was uncovering a conspiracy that went beyond anything I had imagined. The deeper I dug, the more the airport felt like a facade, a stage set up for a play where the actors didn't know the script. The notes continued to appear, the latest one saying Hangar 13 doesn't exist. I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was watching me, guiding my steps. But who? Determined to find the truth, I decided to take a risk. Late one night, I made my way to the hangar area after stealing a pass of a colleague who did day shift there. Now, the blueprints didn't show a Hangar 13, which I thought was a superstitious numbering issue, but before my eyes, I saw the massive structure. As I approached, the air felt charged, the silence oppressive. The hangar, dilapidated and seemingly abandoned, loomed over me like a tomb far away from the main airport. I unlocked the door, my hands trembling, and stepped inside. What I found was beyond comprehension. The hangar was filled with items from Flight 440, seats arranged in eerie rows, luggage stacked neatly at one end, and at the center of it was a cockpit simulator, surrounded by monitors displaying looping footage of a flight taking off but never landing. I heard footsteps and turned to see Jerry standing at the hangar entrance, his expression one of resigned sorrow. I knew you'd find your way here, he said, his voice heavy. You always were too curious for your own good.
Jerry, what is this place? What happened to Flight 440?
I demanded, my voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the hangar. He sighed, a deep, soul-weary sound. Flight 440 was a government experiment, Betty. An experiment in fear and human psychology. The passengers were subjects, unknowing participants in a study on the effects of perpetual flight, of a journey with no destination. I felt my stomach churn, the horror of his words sinking in.
But why? How could anyone do something so monstrous?
Cold War made us do things. It was supposed to be a breakthrough in understanding fear and its impact on the human psyche, Jerry explained, his eyes hollow. But it went too far. The project was shut down, the flight erased from records. Only a few of us know the truth.
And the passengers?
I whispered, afraid of the answer. Lost to a nightmare of our making. Glad you found the truth. If only a janitor could break the news and bring an end to this cycle. The weight of the revelation crushed me. The notes, the hidden messages. It was Jerry who was behind everything from the start, who couldn't risk his life, but through an unassuming janitor, he could finally bring this story to light. In the following weeks, the scandal broke. Investigations were launched, careers ruined, and the government pinned the blame on the airport's administration. Hangar 13 was exposed. It eventually came out that a few passengers of the original Flight 440 were still alive, mentally gone, declared missing from their families, but kept alive. They were brought to the simulation from time to time as a few twisted scientists still studied them. The only good thing that came out of it was that the families who had lost their loved ones decades ago finally got to meet them. Even though their brains were fried, as one of the newspapers reported it, at least the families could finally get answers to their miseries. Jerry was arrested as well. I was called to his hearing, and even though I convinced the world how without him the entire conspiracy couldn't be revealed, the government threw him under the bus. It hurt me that some of the sick minds who had started the experiment got away with less time due to their old age and connections as they kept their mouths shut and saved the masterminds. But Jerry, the poor man, was sentenced for life. It says a lot about the fractured world we live in, I guess. My name is Professor Brandon Anderson, and I have always considered myself adept at navigating the complex corridors of the human mind. However, nothing in my extensive career as a psychologist had prepared me for the perplexing series of events that unfolded during what should have been a routine trip to an international psychology conference. The day started ordinarily enough, with the hustle and bustle of the airport. It was only when I approached the check-in counter that the first thread began to unravel. The attendant, a young man with an otherwise professional demeanor, paused mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on a point over my shoulder, a look of sheer panic flitting across his face before he snapped back to reality, offering no explanation for the bizarre interruption. Puzzled but pressed for time, I proceeded to security, where the oddities multiplied. The security officer, while patting me down, whispered frantically, "Do you see him too?" before abruptly walking away, as if our exchange had never happened. By the time I reached my gate, seated, waiting for my flight, I observed my fellow passengers. A woman seated across from me was engaged in a heated conversation on her phone, but as I looked closer, I realized that it was a toy phone. I approached her, my professional intrigue getting the better of me. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you having trouble with your phone?" I asked, aiming for a tone of casual concern. She blinked at me, confusion evident in her expression before a slow smile crept onto her face.
Oh, no, I'm just practicing for a play. You see, I'm an actress.
She explained, though her answer did little to alleviate some unease within me. Attempting to shake off the feeling, I decided to grab a coffee. That's when I met Tom, a barista whose behavior added another layer of mystery to the day. As he handed me my coffee, his hand trembled violently, spilling some of the drink. "Everything okay, Tom?" He glanced around nervously before leaning closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper.
"It's all a test, isn't it? I mean, how can all of this be real?"
He muttered, a manic glint in his eyes that I had seen in patients during delusional episodes. His words sent a chill down my spine. A test? His notion began to weave itself into the fabric of my observations, forming a pattern I couldn't yet understand. As I walked away, my coffee forgotten, I overheard snippets of conversations, each more disjointed and nonsensical than the last. A man arguing about the impossibility of the time on his watch, a child asking her mother why everyone was pretending to be someone else, and a group of teens laughing about how none of it mattered because we'll just wake up from it. With each step, the atmosphere thickened, with an unspoken tension, a collective unease that seemed to echo my growing suspicion that something was profoundly amiss. This couldn't merely be a coincidence or a series of unrelated oddities. My mind raced through possible explanations: mass hysteria, a shared psychotic disorder, or perhaps, as Tom the barista had suggested, a test of some sort. But who would orchestrate such a thing, and to what end? And more importantly, why did I feel like the only one aware of the absurdity unfolding around me? Determined to find answers, I decided to confront the situation head-on. My first step was to gather more evidence, to engage with others and confirm that I was not alone in my perceptions. The deeper I delved into my peculiarities surrounding me, the more the airport felt like a stage set for an elaborate play, with each participant unknowingly playing their part. My resolve to unearth the truth about this charade led me to initiate more conversations, each interaction threading a needle through the fabric of a reality that seemed increasingly warped. I approached the security guard again, hoping to glean insight in the day's events. "Have you noticed anything unusual today? Anything at all?" I inquired, my tone deliberately even. The guard eyed me for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a sigh, he confided,
You wouldn't believe the things I've seen. People walking through the walls, luggage moving on its own. But every time I try to report it, the incident, it just vanishes from the cameras.
His voice trailed off, a mixture of fear and resignation in his words. This confession was the most unsettling yet. It suggested not mere psychological anomalies among individuals, but a distortion of reality itself. My mind, trained to seek rational explanations, struggled to comprehend it. As boarding time neared, a sense of urgency propelled me forward. I found myself standing, watching the crowd, when a sudden announcement over the PA system caught my attention.
Brandon, it's time to wake up.
Surprised to hear my name, I made my way to the desk, where I was greeted not by an airline employee, but by Dr. Amelia Mara, a colleague and friend from the university where I taught. Her presence was both a shock and a relief. "Amelia, what are you doing here?" I asked, bewildered. She smiled, a knowing look in her eyes that immediately unsettled me.
This airport, the people, the bizarre events you've been witnessing, it's all been a carefully constructed simulation, Brandon. We're not really here.
Wake up? Amelia, what are you talking about? What's going on here? My confusion mounted with her cryptic words. She took a deep breath before continuing.
You've been a part of a groundbreaking virtual reality therapy session, Brandon. After the accident, you were left with severe trauma and acute paranoia.
Her words only deepened my bewilderment. Simulation? What are you talking about?
After the accident, you were left with severe trauma and acute paranoia. We created this scenario to help you confront and overcome your fears in a controlled environment.
Amelia explained, her voice calm and reassuring. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Memories I had locked away began to surface. The accident at the airport 2 years ago, the loss of my wife, the subsequent descent into a paranoia so profound did it threaten to consume me. As the realization settled in, the airport around me began to dissolve, the simulation glitching and fading away to reveal the stark walls of the therapy room where I had been sitting, virtual reality equipment attached to my head. Amelia was there, real this time, along with a team of therapists who had been monitoring the session. The twist of reality, the realization was overwhelming and tears dripped from my eyes. Yet, as the initial shock waned, a profound sense of gratitude took its place. The bizarre behaviors, the erratic events, even the conversations with Tom and the others were all facets of my psyche the program had used to guide me toward healing. In that moment, as I reacquainted myself with a reality untainted by the distortions of trauma and paranoia, I understood the true depth of the human mind's capacity for both illusion and recovery. The therapy, as unconventional as it was, had offered me a doorway out of the maze of my own fears, back into a world where airports were just airports, and the people within them were just people. And though I stepped out of the therapy center that day with a heart still heavy with loss, I also stepped out with a newfound strength. A clarity of mind I had thought forever lost. The experiment, my journey through a simulated reality, had ended, but my true journey toward healing had just begun.